Good morning. Wow. I am so excited to see all of you here on what is a warm and balmy day in Washington, D.C. But I'm glad the weather didn't deter you because I think today is going to be a really exciting day of productive ideas and really meaningful dialogue. So looking forward to hearing all of your thoughts and ideas. We have an amazing lineup of speakers this morning that are here not just to share their thoughts and insights, but to hear from you. So before I turn it over to our first speaker, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If you are tweeting or Facebooking about the event, I hope you'll use the hashtag #ActOnClimate. That way others can follow the dialogue and participate. They can also send in questions that we can hopefully address in our later panel. And also, if you have friends who were not able to attend the event, it will be live streamed at whitehouse.gov/live. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker. Melissa Rogers is Special Assistant to the President and Executive Director of the White House Office of Faith and Neighborhood Partnerships. Prior to coming to the White House, she served as the Director of the Center for Religion and Public Affairs at Wake Forest University Divinity School. And Melissa will be coming up to officially welcome you to today's program.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see you, and I've just gotten the opportunity to get to see a few old friends already, and I look forward to the rest of the day for time for conversation and work together on these important challenges. Thank you for being here today, especially making your way through the snow, and I know many of you traveled to be here, and we're very grateful for that. It is my great pleasure and honor to bring greetings to all of you from President Barack Obama. He is also very grateful that you are here today and looking forward to the work that we can do together. I also want to thank the organizers of the conference, EPA and CEQ, and also my DPC, Domestic Policy Council colleague, Dan Utak. And of course, thanks to all of you for your leadership and the opportunity to partner with you on these important issues like climate change and environmental justice. A special word of thanks also to Administrator Gina McCarthy for all her good leadership and the opportunity to work with her, and to Michael Boots, who is the acting chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality. Well, I know that many of you have been at this work for a very long time. And in fact, when I was getting ready to come here this morning, one of the things that I brought with me was this report of the first Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. And I know many of you had a role in producing this report, including a very important section in the report that addresses environmental issues and climate change issues. So thank you to all of you who worked on this report, whose recommendations really have led us to this day. In 2009, as many of you remember, President Obama asked this advisory council to focus on how we could strengthen partnerships between the federal government and faith and community groups to care for our environment and combat climate change. The president knew that there was great potential for engaging faith and community groups in environmental stewardship, with a special focus on protecting the most vulnerable among us. And we're so pleased that this work has continued since that time, and the fact that we have the opportunity today to push it forward to an even greater extent. We know that with you, we have a shared responsibility for protecting the wholeness of creation and caring for the poor and vulnerable. So thanks again for the opportunity to work with you on that. As you know, our White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships works with faith and community groups on a range of issues to serve people in need. We work with a range of federal agencies, and we have a strong relationship with EPA, and including Administrator McCarthy, Brian Bond, and my friend Jerry Lawson, who's here today. And our link on these environmental issues and faith and community groups has really been one that President Obama has pioneered. The White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships has typically worked over the years on a variety of social service issues, but President Obama has been the first president to include environmental stewardship as part of the work that we do with faith and community groups. So we know that protecting the vulnerable includes protecting the environment and combating climate change. And that link now has been well established by President Obama. President Obama has also pioneered some other concepts in this area, and I just want to touch on a couple of them. In the Obama administration, faith and community groups are still welcome to compete for government grants and contracts, of course. Our office does not make any decisions about grants and contracts, and properly so, but we do inform people of ways to apply for that funding if they're interested in doing so. Our work is much broader than that, however. We also form what we often call non-financial partnerships with faith and neighborhood groups, ones in which no money passes hands. After all, many organizations, including many religious bodies, don't want to get government funds. They are not interested in that, but they are interested in working with the government to promote the common good. And so an example of these kinds of non-financial partnerships include the Energy Star program. And here I want to recognize my colleague Jerry Lawson in particular. Through Energy Star, EPA provides a proven energy management strategy and free tools for congregations and other community groups to save energy and money through increased energy efficiency. And the cornerstone of this approach, which we'll discuss more later today, is to begin by assessing and comparing and benchmarking the energy use of facilities. And armed with this knowledge, buildings can then begin the process of improving their energy efficiency with help from EPA. And so many of you have been leaders in this particular effort, so we're grateful for that. Nearly 2,000 congregations have already answered the call by partnering with EPA in the Energy Star program and using available energy management tools. I encourage you to continue your work in this area and to find ways that we can reach out to new organizations that don't know about these tools, yet would be interested in them and would be able to work with us to really create some positive impacts in our society. So Energy Star is not a financial collaboration. It does not involve government grants or contracts for faith-based or community organizations. But all of our collaborations nonetheless promote the common good and are based on a shared mission of protecting human life and health from the effects of pollution and supporting natural resources and ecosystems. Energy Star provides tools and tech support to save energy, which saves money and prevents pollution. And so we look forward to continuing to work with you on that project. I should note also that President Obama has stressed that we want to work not only with secular and single faith groups, but also interfaith groups. And that has been a pioneering influence of the president as well. And so we have, in the Energy Star program, also worked with many interfaith groups to try to promote this emphasis on saving energy and protecting the environment. And this includes groups like Interfaith Power and Light, now in 40 states, Green Faith, and the National Religious Coalition on Creation Care. So thank you for your work in that shared objective. The president has also been very clear about the need to reach out broadly to people of many different religious, political, and theological stripes. And we feel like there is a great coming together these days around these issues, and we have an opportunity to broaden our coalition that are working together to protect the environment, to bring about environmental justice, and to combat climate change. Let me close with just some words from our advisory council that worked on these issues several years ago. The advisory council said that faith and community-based organizations can play an important role in helping to facilitate inclusive, collaborative planning processes at all levels of government that will address climate change impacts, especially on low-income and vulnerable populations. Faith and community groups, both at home and around the world, have firsthand experience and knowledge of the most vulnerable populations and the struggles they face. And they have the capacity, knowledge, and networks that can be activated as valuable partners in climate change adaptation and mitigation efforts. The U.S. government should utilize this vast knowledge to help shape public policy, program design, funding decisions, and delivery mechanisms. Well, I think this conference today is another opportunity for us to make good on our efforts to implement this recommendation. So we just want to say again how thankful we are for your work. how much we appreciate the fact that we can have this conversation with you and plan for the future, and to say that we welcome all of your input to our office, and we welcome the chance to work together to create important changes and indeed life-saving changes for people both in our own country and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Melissa for that welcome. Our next speaker is someone who has been working behind the scenes in some of this administration's most important energy and environmental policy. He was recently named Special Assistant to the President for Energy and Climate Change. Prior to coming to the White House, Dan Utex served as a senior advisor to Energy Secretary Stephen Chu, and he also spent many years in the Senate working on energy and environmental policy issues, and he is going to come up and share a few insights with us.
Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. I'm going to spend just a few minutes. You've got a terrific program, including remarks next by Administrator McCarthy, who's a great friend and partner in all of this work that we're doing. So I just want to spend just a couple of minutes giving you an overview of all the things the administration is doing in the climate space. And I want to start just by framing it a little bit in terms of why this is such an important priority for the president. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of them is that the president talks about frequently. He certainly did in the climate speech he gave last June when he outlined the climate action plan that we're working hard to implement. And that is that we have a moral obligation to act on climate and to take action to address this threat. And I think there are a lot of reasons that that's the case. I think one of them is just a basic responsibility we have as stewards of our environment, of our planet, and a need to leave that to our children, our grandchildren in better shape than we got it. But the second, I think, is that when we think about air pollution, asthma, a lot of the impacts that we know result from the current way that we produce energy, those fall most heavily on vulnerable populations. And that's true both here in the United States. It's certainly also true globally when you think about climate change and where the impacts are going to be most severely felt, and that's sort of at the tropics, in the tropics, for example. So I think there's a huge moral imperative for us to act, but I think there are also practical economic reasons to do it. I think there's a ton of opportunity in this space for this country to lead in clean energy technologies. There are a lot of potential jobs at stake there. And so I think there's really, at the same time as we take action to address these risks, address these threats to vulnerable populations, to our nation, we really have an opportunity to lay the foundation for really good jobs in energy efficiency and renewable energy and many other technologies. And I think we've seen good progress on that in the last 5 years. So I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes with that context talking about the climate action plan the president laid out last June, which has 3 basic elements. The first is a set of actions that we're going to take to cut carbon pollution and other forms of greenhouse gases. The second is a set of steps that the administration is taking in partnership with states and local governments and across the federal government and with partners in the private sector and the non-government sector to make sure that we're better prepared for the impacts of climate change that we're already seeing and those that we know that we're expect to see in the coming years and decades. And then the third element, which is critical, is continuing to lead internationally to solve what we know ultimately is a global problem. And so I'm just going to hit a few of the highlights there. The first part of the plan, cutting pollution, one of the flagship initiatives that Gina McCarthy is taking the lead on, is to set standards for power plants, for carbon pollution from power plants. So during the first term, under Gina's leadership, we set for the first time limits on mercury and other toxics that can come out of power plants. But we currently have no such standards for carbon pollution. And so the EPA has already taken the step of proposing a standard that would apply to new or future power plants and is now in the process of developing a standard that would apply to existing power plants. And so this is a really important step that we're taking. And I know something that the administration is working very hard on and doing a lot of outreach in developing that. We're also moving forward on renewable energy. The Department of Interior, which manages a lot of land out west, just last week announced that they had permitted the 50th project. So we often have lengthy reviews of big projects, but coming into the start of the administration in 2009, I think there were approximately 0 renewables projects that had been green lighted on federal lands, and now we're up to 50. And by the time we get to 2020, the president's goal is that we will have enough renewables on federal lands to power 6 million homes. So we're making great progress there. I think if you just look at what's happened in terms of the cost of some of these technologies and the way that they're really taking place in the market, it's remarkable. In 2012, the single biggest category of new electricity generation that was added was wind power. And that was about 43% of all new power plants were wind power in 2012. So we've got excellent potential there. We're also taking steps on energy efficiency. The president was at a Safeway distribution center last week with Administrator McCarthy and our Energy Secretary Fox to announce that we were going to take additional measures, building on some actions we took in the first term to set fuel economy standards and greenhouse gas pollution standards for heavy-duty vehicles. And that's, I think, a classic example of a real, as the president called it, a win-win-win, where we can save consumers money by making our shipping system more efficient, cut down pollution, and also continue to lead in manufacturing of clean energy technologies, because most of the trucks that we make, that we use here in the U.S. are really made here in the U.S. And I think we've set great standards in the first term. We're going to build on that in the second term and make sure that our country continues to be the vanguard of that and other clean energy technologies. On the preparedness side, I think even as we take steps to cut pollution, we have to prepare for the impacts that we're already seeing. So on November 1st of last year, the president announced a task force on climate preparedness and resilience made up of governors, mayors, and other elected officials around the country. We've had a couple of good discussions there, including one, I believe, last week or the week before in LA. And the idea there is we want input from around the country at the state and local level about what tools the federal government can provide in terms of information or other resources to really help communities plan for the impacts that they're seeing, which I think varies a lot, place by place, region by region, state by state, and city by city. So, one example of how we're thinking about that is the work that's gone on in New Jersey and New York post-Sandy, where we're really working hard to build in, as we rebuild that area, make sure that we're doing it in a way where it's going to be more resilient, more resistant, more prepared for future events like Sandy. And then finally, just briefly, on the international side, we know that we can't meet this challenge alone. And so the president's plan includes a series of steps to bring other countries along in this effort. I'll just mention a couple of them. There's beyond the big UN talks that I think everybody's familiar with, that where we're working towards a deal that would be in Paris in December of 2015. There are a series of specific initiatives that the administration launched in the plan, and I'll just mention one of those, which is that the president announced that we would stop using public financing to support, through agencies like the Export-Import Bank, new coal plants overseas except in the poorest countries. And so we're working to get other countries along in that effort, and we have a whole series of other measures on the international side. So that's a key part of this broader effort, because of course we can't tackle this problem alone, but I think the U.S. has to lead, and that's the case the president has made. So I just want to echo Melissa's comments and express my thank you to all of you for being here. It's wonderful to see so many people from so many different faith traditions engaged in this effort, and we would love to figure out ways to better partner with all of you. And so thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
Our next speaker is someone that I am very excited to introduce, not just because she is my boss, but because I know personally that she is incredibly passionate about meeting with people from every background and hearing your ideas and thoughts. Since Administrator McCarthy was appointed as the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, she has been on what seems like a nonstop trek across the country to meet with stakeholders and local leaders from various backgrounds to engage on climate change and other issues that are of great importance to communities across the country. She has been a leading advocate over the span of her 30-year career for environmental protection, protecting people's health and the environment, and finding practical solutions to make that happen. Before coming to DC, Administrator McCarthy served as the commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection. She has worked at local and state levels to work on environmental policy, transportation policy, and energy policy. I know for a fact she's very excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. Thank you.
I just realized that I took a shortcut up here. Grace is not my middle name, I guess. I could have walked up the ramp in a much more ladylike fashion, so I hope my mother wasn't watching. First of all, let me recognize that we have a wonderful group of distinguished faith leaders. First of all, warm hugs. Thank you for being here. I couldn't be more pleased to talk to I think, what is a remarkably influential group of people about issues that I think are incredibly important, not just to me and to my family, but to this country and well beyond. So let me first recognize up front, I think, what you already know, which is we are talking today about issues of great importance, not just to government, but I think to all of us. And as faith leaders, you really represent what I think of as the moral backbone of our families, of our communities, of our cities, of our towns. You are often the voice where people learn about the largest issues that we face as a nation and as we face as a planet. I don't know of any group that has an ability to have a broader, crisper, and more loud voice on issues that are important to people than the people in this room today. So that's why I'm incredibly happy that we have pulled this group together so that we can talk about something that I think is one of the most vital public health and environmental and economic challenges of our time. And looking around, the great thing is that I recognize so many of your faces, which tells me that, that you agree with the urgency that the president has put on this issue and the need for shortcuts like I just took to stop walking up endless ramps and jump over and let's do something. And so I guess in many ways you could say that I'm preaching to the choir, but that would be ironic in this group. I guess I'm singing to the preachers or something like that. But we all do know, I think, and we agree, and we're here because we agree, that public health and the planet is really at stake here when you talk about issues as large and as difficult to face as climate change. It is not just a threat to public health, it's not just a threat to the planet, it's a threat to our economy. So the interesting thing about always making those connections is that you can turn what is an immeasurable challenge of climate change, how difficult it's been to get over the hurdle of accepting the science, is because people have been afraid that the actions they take would be detrimental to them economically. It will make life more difficult to them. It will make it more difficult for them to earn a living, to have jobs, to have a growing economy, to get out of the economic challenges that we've all been facing. But the message of the president and the message that I would like to give to you and support the president on is his message is that if you don't do something about climate, that is what is going to be most detrimental to our families. That's what's going to stop the United States from having a sound and growing economy. That's what's going to hold us back on the international world and hold us back from continuing to be the leader that the United States has always been, innovating, pushing the envelope, trying to make what's good for us profitable for us economically. So the president's message is very incredibly refreshing to me and enlightening to, I think, all of us, which is that what we do and act that's good for climate change is also good for our economy. That's the message here. And so let's cut the legs out of all of the naysayers and simply get together, because if we work together, we can pick the most engaging economic initiatives moving forward and get behind those as a way to address what has been just too scary for us to get our arms around. It is not scary. It is a challenge. The United States lives up to facing our challenges together, and we turn those challenges into opportunities. That's the challenge that we have together, is not just to deliver that, but to tell people that that's doable and to start marching down the road together. Let me first of all outline a couple of what I think of as the opportunities here. And I won't name a lot because they're probably too endless for me, because I've been dwelling on these a really long time. First of all, we have an aging power sector. We have an aging power sector where we have 70 or 80-year-old facilities that have been spewing out pollution for a long time, and until the government seems to push them to reduce their pollution, they just continue to march along. Now, you worked with me hand in hand, many of you intimately, on how we address traditional pollutants like mercury to stop that from happening, given the threat that it has to our direct public health and our ability to have healthy, happy children moving forward. We got our arms around this issue. This is exactly the same issue. This is about carbon pollution. It is about making sure that we continue to invest in the way in which we fuel this economy, literally energize this economy in a way that will recognize the limitations of a carbon-rich world and turn that around so that we're making investments in a power sector that doesn't look at 70 years ago, but looks at 70 years from now. That's the challenge. That's an opportunity. We can drive investments into the energy world that make sense for everybody. One of the things we can also do, and it was mentioned in terms of Energy Star, is energy efficiency. Now, why is that not a good thing? Can anyone explain this to me? Look at what the president did on light-duty vehicle rules. That was essentially an energy efficiency standard. It was a carbon pollution reduction standard. What painful outcome did it have? It helped to save and to get more jobs in the thousands, folks, because now all of a sudden our domestic auto manufacturers are producing cars they can sell. Why can they sell it? Customers want it. Why do customers want it? Because instead of going to the gas station every week, they go every 2 weeks. I like that. People like that. It saves them money. Up to $8,000 for a family who hangs on to those new vehicles. Why is that not good? Why would you not embrace it, even if you fail to understand that sorry. You go. Even if you fail to understand that we have a moral obligation to live within the natural resources of this country, we didn't make them, we can't get more. That's the challenge. So don't tell me that I can't make more efficient toilets. We make them. We got to use them, right? So this is the really interesting challenge here, folks, is we get to sell the best products in the world to deal with the most difficult challenge of our time. Let's get to it. You know, let's just buck it up and move forward. And let's just make this country be the country that benefits most from tackling this with the most vigor. From tackling it with the way in which we can not just recognize our moral responsibility of stewards, but let's tell people that we are going to put money in your pockets, we are going to grow jobs, we're going to modernize our power sector. We're going to deliver you products that allow you to meet your obligations and that move people from poverty into the middle class. Because essentially, that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for our kids to have a fair shake. We're looking to do what the president said, is to make sure that if you're working full-time and you're working hard in this country, you have an opportunity to succeed. And all of this is the frame in which I think we need to approach this issue. And if we can do that together, we will be able to tackle these challenges. Now, I know that this new work on Energy Star that we've worked on together, and our announcement of this Energy Star Action Workbook for congregations may seem like a little issue, but frankly, it's underpinning all of the principles that I just noted. It gives you an ability to show that your faith community understands and is embracing the stewardship, the moral obligation that we are talking about, and you are benefiting as a congregation because of that. Go forth and save money for yourselves. That's my message. Okay? Use this thing. We'll help you with any technical assistance we can, but I can't tell you the number of faith communities that I have heard who's living in buildings that they're spewing money out the door because it's inefficient. They don't know how to make ends meet. They don't know how they're going to keep their community served. And we need to work together and recognize that we have an obligation to work on these issues together. One small way to do that is to look at how we ourselves look at those efficiency issues as ways to keep us going, ways to build our backbone, ways to make us more sustainable. And I think if we can do that, we can provide the kind of example that maybe then our congregations will go home and they'll look at the same issues themselves. They'll start looking for those Energy Star labels. They start looking at all of the programs that their states have to offer on energy efficiency. That gives them a little tax relief here, gives them a rebate there, and thinks about in the long run how we are all better off, not just them and their families, but ourselves as a larger community of human beings. Trying desperately to live in this planet in a way that is sustainable and will continue to provide this sort of rich environment that frankly God intended us to have available always. And so that's sort of the challenge that we should be facing together. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am to be working for a president who speaks to these issues so eloquently, who can frame them in a way that, honestly, all of us ought to be able to embrace and to articulate. And I'm grateful that he has stood up and made it a moral issue. That's, I think, what you want in political leaders, is an ability to speak about what our responsibility is. You know, what our responsibility is, not as politicians or as government entities, but our human responsibility to care for one another, and particularly those most vulnerable. Because EPA, I think, has spoken to these issues very broadly. We have done a lot of work to make sure that polluters pay for pollution so that that pollution doesn't impact the lives of people who are breathing dirty air, don't have access to safe drinking water, that we try to provide an opportunity for economic growth in one area to not be done at the detriment of another, especially those who have little or no power to make an impact in those decisions. But what we also know is that while I can show you in black and white that those national efforts that we've taken have been tremendous in reducing the risks associated with with pollution, with facing those challenges, I can show you without a doubt that it has grown the economy, that it has produced jobs, that it has provided more benefit by far than its cost. But we also know that while all of those things are good, the next challenge is not so much a national one, but it's a community by community. It's an individual by individual battle we are taking, because environmental injustice is still happening here. And in a changing climate, that environmental injustice takes on proportions that should be unacceptable to all of us for two reasons. The impacts are so large, but frankly, it is so easy to see we shouldn't be able to ignore it. We are talking about visible impacts that should not be acceptable to any one of us. So part of this is a challenge for us to speak at our level of engagement, keep driving those national rules that recognize the dangers and make polluters responsible for minimizing their pollution. But it also must be an individual challenge that we all take up. We can't ignore it. We see it happening all the time. The challenge that the president has put on our feet is to recognize that. But the opportunity he is identifying is one in which we should neither be afraid to take up the challenge, because the actions he wants us to take are ones that we are going to make good as opportunities for everyone who lives here. But frankly, the big deal is that we have a moral obligation to protect this planet and the people who live in it. It's time to do something about that. Thank you very much. Now, lucky you people, lucky you. Thank you very much, please. Lucky you people, now you get to ask me questions. I do have about 10 minutes. I'd love to do a Q&A. We can talk in more detail about the work we're doing, or you can tell me what I can do to help. Please, sir.
My name is Fred Kruger, National Religious.
Just a sec, Fred. There you go.
There's an emerging awareness of the public health challenge from carbon fuels. For instance, we just helped complete an epidemiological study in West Virginia that showed the cost in public health from coal is greater than the value of the coal extracted. Where I'm from in Santa Rosa, California, there's 27% rate of asthma in the children. A study at New York University shows that is attributable to auto exhaust and particularly diesel. Why can't we address this? We have a public health emergency, and it's not being addressed to the extent that it could be, but we have ways to do that.
Yep. We could ask ourselves that every day, and guess what I do? I ask myself that every day. Let me talk to you. I will tell you that the president this year, or I should actually say June of last year, really raised the profile of this issue because we had been relying on Congress to provide a way to address an issue as big as climate in a very comprehensive way. Recognizing that that wasn't happening, the president said to all of his cabinet members, and I mean each and every one of us, to go look at the tools in your toolbox, because we ain't waiting. We're going to recognize the challenge, and we're going to take actions moving forward. So he did look at the asthma levels. We have been moving forward on our air quality side at a pace that is, I think, unmatched, as well as to drive, again, the actions that we need that won't be detrimental to the economy, but will recognize the public health impacts and grow the economy. You've helped us with all that. The reason why the president went out and did the heavy-duty vehicle issue was because diesel exhaust creates air pollution, which impacts public health. That fact is indisputable. So as we look at how we drive better and better vehicles and now better and better trucks, we can lower the cost of consumer products that are being driven around by those trucks because it saves diesel fuel. And we can lower emissions and make significant reductions moving forward. That's in our toolbox now. That's indisputable. I know how to use it. We're working with all of the companies that produce those engines and all those trailers, and we're going to deliver it. And we're going to deliver it very soon. So that's what we're doing. Now on climate, he's taken the exact same approach. It's carbon pollution, not climate change, stupid. Okay? Let's just talk about carbon pollution. That's what he said to us. You regulate pollutants, it's a pollutant, let's regulate it just like a pollutant ought to be regulated. That's what we're doing with our power sector. That's why we're looking at both two things. One is we put out a rule that regulates what kind of technologies you need to have now for future power plants. So we are looking at not just very clean coal from a traditional pollutant standpoint. We are requiring carbon capture and sequestration, which means the carbon, if you produce it, has to go someplace where it's permanently stored. So it doesn't get into the atmosphere, it doesn't impact it. Now, we are not projecting a lot of new carbon for the very reason that it is uneconomical right now in most regions of the country to get at the coal that's very difficult to get at, because most of the coal that's easy has already been gotten. And so it becomes very difficult from a competitive standpoint for coal to compete against inexpensive natural gas. So we are factoring that into our considerations. But there is a place for coal, but that place needs to be clean from traditional pollutants. And right now the proposal says you got to put that carbon someplace where it won't get into the atmosphere and continue to contribute to climate change. We are in June going to be proposing how we look at existing power plants. I will tell you folks, we are going to put out a proposal that is both going to get significant reductions, but be absolutely flexible, recognizing that states are all in very different places here, and we need to make this work. We need to make this an opportunity for every state to advance their own economies the way they want to advance them, but overall, we've got to start driving that carbon pollution down. And we are not going to make this a statement on a particular fuel. All fuels are at the table. We recognize that. They exist. They will exist. But we're going to do it in a way that overall is going to drive those reductions down, commensurate with what we really need to do here. But that doesn't alleviate everybody else from doing their part. The president has clearly stated that he would welcome an opportunity to work with Congress, because this is an issue where Congress could speak in a more comprehensive way, and it's an issue where globally we need to leverage our own commitment to get a global commitment moving forward. And I promise I won't answer the next question with as long an answer as I'm sorry, right here and then right here. Go ahead.
Given that we have the technology to generate electricity without any carbon pollution,
Yes.
why isn't the new source performance standard 0? Why do you, in essence, give a separate standard to each fuel type which accepts or locks us into fossil fuel generation of electricity?
That's a really good question, because I think that, an equal emphasis in the administration has been to take a look at how we move renewables forward. There is a great and growing interest in nuclear as well. I mean, so everything is under consideration, because climate is an extremely large issue that needs every ounce of creativity that we can bring to it. The reason why we didn't do it here is because we are regulating under the Clean Air Act. There's two issues. I'm not making an energy policy judgment here. I am reducing pollution from a sector of the economy that we regulate. In this particular sector, we're regulating fossil fuel emissions. Now, we do not think that any coal company or any coal or any natural gas or any oil facility, which is what we're regulating, can get to 0 in pollution. We have to have a sense of reality in moving forward. That's what we delivered, because we think it's the right thing to do, plus it is the legally correct thing to do. And the challenge for us is I have certain laws that I've been given and authorities. I am staying in my lane, baby. I am not going to make myself susceptible to that EPA overreach argument. I am not overreaching. I am doing exactly what using the authority Congress gave me, and I'm staying within the boundaries of the laws that I have to implement. Nobody died and made me queen, although that wouldn't be actually that, but no, I'm only kidding.
My question to you is, for our faith communities in Santa Barbara, the biggest single challenge for us is financing the energy efficiency technologies, because the savings come behind it. But for the congregations in our coalition who need it most, they're the less affluent ones, and we struggle with that. It's not a lot of money, but we are non-profits, so we don't have the benefit of tax deductions from the solar panels that we can put on. Santa Barbara is ideal for that kind of technology, but it is a significant challenge for us.
Well, thank you very much for raising that issue. I have been sort of amazed at different regions of the country and different states finding different financing mechanisms that can help advance the energy efficiency investments moving forward. Maybe that is something where if you leave me your card, we can talk directly to you as well, but also provide something a little more generically for people about the way that different states have decided to do this. One of the things that it is a big deal. It's also been amazing, some of the financing tools that people have found to invest in solar. In California, you will see that solar is going wild. And it's going wild because they've found different creative financing strategies so that people can get the benefits of having those lower energy costs without the significant capital investment moving forward. Other states have done similar efforts on energy efficiency. So we should look at that. I could give you some examples of where, for example, there are green banks that are broadly supporting and working with private financiers that are actually getting the expense of making a home more efficient and taking some of the credits for that and applying it elsewhere to obligations that they have. So we can, I think it's a great opportunity for us to gather that information and share it with you more broadly. Because I do think it's one of the challenges is how do we recognize the long-term opportunities by supporting the short-term capital. But it's starting to happen more and more. It's very clear in the renewable side. It's not quite so clear in the efficiency, so we'll provide that information.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Nandini Moli from Maryland, and I commend and compliment all the effort that's going on, led by EPA and DOE. I'm an energy consultant. I run a small business consultancy in energy and environmental area, and I would like to share just an observation with you, having been in this industry. For nonprofit organizations, just like the gentleman mentioned about financing, I also have seen that the value chain, the vendors, the equipment manufacturers, the folks who are ready to do work are not doing work with the nonprofits. Instead, they divert their efforts towards profit. Organizations like companies working with the manufacturing organizations and so on to do the same type of installation in private companies rather than in nonprofit institutions. And I believe this is to be taken up in a dialogue manner, just like how we are congregating today. If a dialogue could be established between the agency and the equipment vendors and everybody in the value chain and bring their awareness up as to the significance of this sector. I believe strongly, today I'm representing Hindu communities from Maryland, and I believe every single temple I have been in, there is a potential, large opportunity to have impact, but we are not able to attract the people who can bring the equipment to the door. So I put that as a request from the.
All right, let me see what we can do about thinking about that. One of the, I hope, outcomes of this group is to sort of hopefully get together with people who care about the same things that we all care about and see things clearly. But let's get our own action items because we want to not just be able to talk, but to be able to deliver some technical assistance, some forums, address the issues that you see that are the barriers to your congregations moving forward. One of the frustrations that I've had about working in the climate area, which I've been doing for a long time, being told by the scientists where the science is heading, I think it's been work that we would prefer to have been engaged 15 years ago talking about this in this way, but we are where we are. Part of the frustration is that I think that many feel like if you're not at zero, you're never making an accomplishment. And that's been a problem for us on the climate side, because I know it's a big deal. But you know as well as I that nobody goes from, doing really bad things to being a saint in about a day and a half. Some might, but not most. It's being rewarded for the better behavior and celebrating that tends to just keep movements forward. And sometimes I think where the investment is going is these really big bangs for the buck, and where there's leveraging and things, as opposed to the kind of grassroots movement that I believe an issue of climate needs to have long-term viability and real action happen. And so maybe that we just need to sit people down and start talking about and reminding them of why your community was so vital at the beginning of the environmental movement, and that this is no different than that. It is an engagement that needs to be personal. And there's nothing more personal to anybody than their faith leaders. So if I can do, if you sort of note these things, we'll start brainstorming on how we pull that together. I've got your note and I've got the financing one. Keep going, taking notes. And I know I'm running out of time. Isn't this awful? How many? Two more.
Michael
Yes.
McAfee, and I'm speaking in regard to a small Baltimore community church in inner city Baltimore with a large community of homeowners. How can we walk away today and get connected with folks where we can do a grassroots outreach to the entire community as a church community to an area that consists of some 300-400 homeowners in inner city Baltimore that otherwise are overlooked completely?
Can you leave me a card and we'll talk about it? We'll figure out how to. I know we have programs and things designed for this. It's all in the messaging. So let's reconnect. One more request. Action item. You pick. I'm horrible at this.
This is actually not an action, but an ask how we can help you. I'm Joelle from the local Interfaith Power and Light. I know these carbon rules on the existing power plants is a big deal, and it's coming up in June. How can faith leaders, what reactions do you expect to those proposals, and how can faith communities best support that process?
Well, one of the things, and thank you for asking, and to all of those I didn't get to, write a note. Get it to Ali. You want to? Give it to the girl in the third place, sure. Yeah. So get it, and we'll answer all of them. All right. Thank you for asking the question. What do I expect? Well, what we have been doing is we've been out all over the place. We have had listening sessions all over the country. We've been meeting both with environmental folks as well as the energy world, because essentially this is all about fossil fuel generated power and how we can look at this more broadly. You will see that this is going to push momentum for renewables, energy efficiency, demand reduction strategies. This is not going to be all about what you can do at a particular facility, because this is, after all, an energy sector issue. I need comments coming in on this proposal when people get to read it. I need the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we are doing absolutely our best to be more informed on this proposal than any we have ever done, because we know it's a big deal, and we know it will get attacked. What I have asked the utilities in the states, because we have engaged them heavily, essentially this will be a state plan on how to apply this standard in a way that makes sense for the economy and the energy of that state. That's how the statute works. I think it's great, because it gives every state to embrace reasonableness and action moving forward. But we already know, I know from reading the papers, which I do once in a while, that there's already going to be hundreds of millions of dollars specifically designed to take this proposal down. That's at least what I'm reading. Now, I'm not paranoid, I'm just reading stuff. So I just want, the only thing I've really asked of the utilities is in advance of the proposal, please give us an ability to work together to get a proposal that makes sense. Tell us what you think so we can listen and out of the gate be better off than we usually are, knowing that people will be looking at that for every signal, good, bad, or indifferent, that it sends. So that we'll have an ability, hopefully, to get those millions spent in a productive way instead of a counterproductive way. We have had wonderful engagement on this. I do not see the utilities going out at this point or any state saying it can't be done, it can't be done, it can't be done. States are recognizing the positive way in which we're engaging them, and I have great faith that this type of outreach, this honest engagement, will get us a proposal that's better than anybody expected, and that will provide fertile ground for comment. But you're gonna have to participate. You're gonna have to encourage people to participate, first of all, to give it a chance, you know, to not out of the gate say it's bad, but to see whether or not we've crafted this in a way that's going to do what the president challenged us to do, is tackle climate change in a way that continues to grow the economy in this country. That's what we think we're delivering, and that's what we want people to judge it by. Thank you very much.